Welcome back to Bleav in Softball. I'm your host, Jenna, and a lot of summer softball is in the books. It is hard to believe that fall is just around the corner. So however you got here today, whether it was an audio podcast platform like Apple, Spotify, etc., or watching on YouTube, thank you. Subscribe and rate the show if you haven't yet. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Bleav in Softball. That's BLEAV. And there's merch. Click the link in our bio on either of those pages or go to shop.bleav.com to purchase 3 different shirts available for you for some of our favorite segments, covering our bases, safer out, and catch you soon. All right, let's go through today's batting order. First, we'll be covering our bases. I'll give you some news and call-outs from around the softball world. Then we'll head into today's interview with Cheri Kempf. She is well known for her leadership roles in pro softball leagues like AU, Athletes Unlimited, and the NPF, but also as a player. She was a 92 World Cup champion with Team USA, 4-time national champion, a self-taught pitcher who ended up being an instructor and had her own business with Club K, covered softball for years as a broadcaster. I mean, you name it, it seems like she's done it. This is actually the second time she's been on the show. She led off season 2 for us. I recommend listening to that one, by the way. And now here we are in season 4. So I'm excited to catch up on everything since then, especially as Athletes Unlimited season just wrapped. Then we'll end things with the foul tip of the week, where we share tips to help us get better. All right, let's get started. Covering our bases. First, I want to start with the Athletes Unlimited Championship season. It's season 4 for this league, which is wild to think about. But some of the headlines, Odyssey Alexander is the champ. And I liked hearing what she had to say afterwards when they interviewed her. She said she felt her best mentally and that she was just being free when she was out there playing. And I love that she, of course, gave a lot of credit to her teammates and the rest of the folks in the league with her. But she also said, I'm proud of me. And I think that's good because you should be proud of yourself too. And I felt like she had such a good balance of that pride for herself as well as everyone else who helped her. And then seeing her family and knowing that they were there, like her grandpa and her niece, etc., that's just really exciting too. And I think what we all love about sports. And it really did have me flashing back to the 2021 Women's College World Series. And I was thinking this, and then I saw one of our friends of the show, Karen Johns, actually tweet, or she posted on X, greatness cannot be kept quiet. We all saw this day coming back in OKC. I felt like that summarized it so well because we did. I mean, what she did at that time in the college world just felt like foreshadowing for what she's doing now in the pro world. And I think it's really cool to do it in this type of format because you're not just the best performing player to be the champion. You're in a leadership position as a pitcher in her case, but you're also, the smartest or most effective captain in this situation. And she did it as a player coming from a mid-major school like JMU. And you think about people like Sydney McKinney being the number 1 draft pick from Wichita State and Sam Fisher from LMU. You think about how more and more players from mid-major schools are represented at this level. And she's also a woman of color. And Alicia Ocasio, for example, talked about the importance of that when she won back in season 2 of the championship series. See it to be it. It just feels pretty big time. The other medalists were Alyssa Denham, Danielle Gibson, and Rachel Garcia. And I have to say, Denham seems just to be getting better and better as a professional player. As the competition gets better, it seems like she does, which I love to see that. And then the defensive player of the year was Jessie Warren, who, by the way, if you remember, was also the AUX defensive MVP. So this is another one where we knew back in her OKC days with Florida State, they still play her diving catch at the Women's College World Series in the highlights every single year. And getting to see her and Sis Bates on the left side of the infield together, I mean, are you kidding me? It's amazing. And you all know that I love defense. We see outstanding defensive plays constantly in Athletes Unlimited. Do you think there should be a way to earn more defensive points? I want to know what you all think. And then, of course, I have to give a shout out to the Bleavers who did really well this season in Athletes Unlimited. 4 in the top 10. Garcia, as mentioned, was number 4. Gwen Svekis was number 5. Not her first time being number 5, by the way. Spent a lot of time in the top 10 during her AU career. Kelsey Stewart at number 9, and Hannah Flippen at number 10. And then last but absolutely not least, Rookie of the Year, Megan Faremo, who you all know we got to talk to her during her time at AUX as she was transitioning out of college into the professional world. And it is just so cool seeing her evolve as a pro right before our eyes. And the league has evolved as well. It's cool that there's history that we can actually look at now as a league. The first back-to-back medalist in a championship series, Alyssa Denham. Shout out to Rachel Garcia because she did become the AUX champion and then obviously medaled in this round. But in terms of championship series, Denham, the first back-to-backer. Highest attended AU game in league history was Champ Day in season 4. That feels poetic in a lot of ways, but just the fact that this league is getting to a point where it does have history, and that history is starting to mean something, because everything was historic at first. It was the first of everything, but now we're seeing this constant push that just gets better and better over time. So of course, we're going to talk way more about all things AU in today's interview. Second, the transfer portal, college softball. We have been monitoring, as you know, some of the biggest names in the college transfer portal this offseason. A lot of folks have found their place now since they've entered the portal, and schools now started, first semester schools, for example. But a big one that everyone's talking about right now is Kelly Maxwell going to OU. After 4 years at Oklahoma State, the grad transfer goes to the in-state rival in Norman. There has been debate about it. On the one hand, some people talk about how rivalries are one of the things that we love most about college sports. And while transferring in general might not be an issue, transferring to a known rival could be another story. Does it burn bridges? You could point out that Bedlam is the in-state rivalry in Oklahoma. Head coach Kenny Gajewski was quoted as saying that Kelly has, quote, lost everything here that she's ever done, and, quote, as long as I'm here, it'll be hard for her to come back here. Letting that sink in. But then on the other hand, others advocate that a student athlete should be able to go wherever they feel is right for them, whatever the right fit is, should they have to apologize for it. It's been noted, for example, that Kenny Gajewski was a national champion baseball player at OU before working at Oklahoma State. You could also argue that the bigger rivalry is the OU-Texas rivalry. They're going to the SEC together. So with all this in mind, I would love to know what you think. How do you feel about college athletes transferring to rival programs? In the meantime, third, we have fall ball. One of the fun parts that I remember from the offseason in college is getting to play some games in the fall. It's a grind at practice every day, training, the weight room. To get to actually play those games is really, really nice. And some programs have started to announce their fall ball schedules on social media and on their websites. And if they haven't yet, they might soon. So keep an eye out on your favorite programs to catch some more college softball in 2023 ahead of the 2024 season. You also get a glimpse at the newbies too, which is fun. And to bring it home, speaking of newbies, I've been a little bit of one myself. I've actually been expanding to call new sports in my broadcasting career. And actually talking with Cheri kind of boosted my motivation for it even more. Because as we all know, Athletes Unlimited is not just softball. It includes women's volleyball, lacrosse, and basketball too right now. And they just want to keep expanding if they can. So talking with her about her involvement in all of the sports kind of got me excited about it all over again. And for me, that looks like, I just called my first couple of field hockey games this fall last week. I have more volleyball matches coming up after doing my first one last fall. I did soccer last year. I was solo by myself on ESPN Plus for the first round of the NCAA tournament and just kind of dove right in. And it was really, really fun. And, softball's number one. We all know that. But I also love supporting all women's sports because it's just nonstop. And someone else who is nonstop is today's guest. So let's head into the interview. She's an executive at Athletes Unlimited, former commissioner of National Pro Fastpitch, longtime broadcaster and instructor, and Hall of Fame player, Cheri Kempf. Cheri, it's really nice to have you back on the show. I can't believe it's been a few years since last time.
Look, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And it's wild because last time we chatted, the first season of Athletes Unlimited softball had just finished. And now the fourth season has just finished. And a million, it feels like, seasons of other sports in between. Has that sort of sunk in yet?
It's funny. When I hear the number, 11 seasons, 12 seasons, it is kind of mind-boggling because I think in any case, in a situation like this, it's a startup, it's something new, it's this sport and this sport and this sport. And in the middle of all that is softball. And so I think it is it's the nature of the beast to some degree, but it is difficult to really absorb this, we're now fourth season of softball just completed, and really rolling with the other three sports as well. So um, long answer to your question, but no, I think it's tough to take it all in.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who's been watching since the beginning, I mean, it's even tough for me kind of to wrap my head around it a little bit. At this point, we've had more than 20 AU softball athletes on this show. Plus, we've had announcers like Danielle Laurie and facilitators in the past, like Lauren Lappin, Jen Salling, and obviously execs like yourself. So even just trying to wrap my head around that is a little bit crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's a company that was aggressive, I think, from the start. I mean, from by the very nature of launching amid COVID, when a lot of other more well-established leagues and sporting events were shut, completely just kind of sitting on the sidelines. And so we launched amid COVID in August of 2020, and then really have never taken our foot off the gas. I think, three sports within 12 months and then four sports in 18 months. And then the expansion of softball, to add AUX in 2022 and to keep that going. And we continue to talk about more expansion. So
that's really exciting. I mean, I'm obviously always on board for anything Athletes Unlimited is going to do. So I'm excited to see what expansion looks like moving forward, because just thinking about the journey from season one to now and through all the seasons, as you mentioned, how would you kind of describe what that process has been like in terms of what you've learned and what you've been able to build?
I think the process was and remains fast and furious. I think if you are on the inside of working these events and working in Athletes Unlimited generally, it is fast and furious. There's a lot coming at you. I mean, we just finished three sports in 2.5 months with lacrosse, AUX, and then softball championship. And we have in 2 weeks, we have media days for volleyball. So it's certainly a very busy time of year. But I think that what you have seen is, first of all, from the launch, from the idea and the concept by John Patrickhoff and Jonathan Soros, I think you've seen that a commitment to that, first of all, to stay the course, to set this unique formatting into four different sports that otherwise had seen nothing even remotely close to it. And then really to stick with it and to make a commitment to fans, both in venue, once we could start having those fans, and through broadcast and other mediums to get people to be able to see the product. So I think it's been, those are the things that stick with me. There's no denying that it is intense from the standpoint of being on the inside and being involved in all the sports and all the happenings. But there's also I have a lot of respect for the commitment and for never, I could tell you, 2 or 3 times when I myself, just knowing how significant this is for women's professional sports, there are times when, I thought in my heart, oh no, this is going to be a moment where we pause or tap the brakes a bit. And really, to the credit of the co-founders, they just haven't done that. They just have not accepted anything less than full steam ahead.
Well, and that's been evident, I think, just as a fan and someone who watches not just softball, but when you look at volleyball, when you look at lacrosse, when you look at basketball as well. I think it's interesting and very cool that this is such a focus, at least right now, on women's sports. And you mentioned the co-founders, the Johns, they're male founders that invested in women's sports. And I think that is just such an interesting aspect to all of this when we think about, the type of support that we need for women's sports.
Well, and I just think it can't be lost. It is the most significant movement for women's professional sports in history. To launch 4 platforms, 3 of which did not exist in the United States. That's softball with the NPF gone, indoor volleyball and lacrosse. None of those had platforms. Basketball did not we certainly have given a very valid and terrific option for basketball players to stay in this country in the off season from the WNBA. But I think that is all significant. And then when you talk about volleyball and talk about just commitment. So that's probably the best example of all. So volleyball was played in the spring for two seasons, 2 years. And then when we went with ESPN, along with them, decided that it would be better placed in the fall. But instead of going away for 18 months or whatever it was, 16 months, and just not having volleyball, last spring we went on a volleyball tour and toured campuses with an all-star lineup of our professionals. So again, that's just a sign to say, here's the easy path and here's a more challenging one. Which one's the right move? And then you do that regardless of whether it's challenging or not.
And the partnerships, like you said, I know ESPN for softball, volleyball, lacrosse, there's an exclusivity with them in 2023, which is great. I think the exposure there has been fantastic. But to be able to have those conversations with your partners to figure out what's best for the audience and the athletes, of course, like I think that piece is really important too, to be able to have that kind of communication.
For sure. And I think that you've seen that flexibility. You've seen, we really don't go to ESPN and say this is absolutely where we have to be and this has to be our game time. We really want the best exposure on their platforms that they're willing to give us. And we've been flexible and pliable with that. And I think that's pretty much a theme throughout Athletes Unlimited. It is although it's a very unique model and it's set up differently, there's constant flexibility, I think. And that's with feedback from certainly our players who have a lot of contributions to be made internally, our partners, not just our broadcast partners, but others. And then hopefully we continue to hear and listen to fans and what they want and what's going to really be moving to them.
When you said it too, you're establishing 3 opportunities that at the time, didn't really exist in the States. I think with volleyball in particular, that example of the fact that you had to go overseas basically to play professionally. And now there's this opportunity with AU is so interesting. But then you have partnerships as well on the basketball side with like the WNBA and the League Pass platform where you could watch some Athletes Unlimited games. So that element of sort of working together with an existing league as well, I also see that with Athletes Unlimited, in addition to, creating new things and new opportunities.
I think it's something that women's sports and women's professional sports in particular need. And it's something that has not only been absent, it's been totally the other direction. So it's been us getting in our own way. It's been us working against each other. At different times, various times. And I say this all the time that, my introduction to John Patrikoff was, I was the commissioner of the NPF. And the reason that we were on the phone together was to work together. And that came from him. I was used to being bristled, even internally on the NPF. We had folks that weren't always rowing in the same direction for the good of everyone. But I was so used to people coming after us that I kind of couldn't believe it. It was a head scratcher for me why this guy's on the phone trying to say, hey, we think if we did come into the space of softball, we could make this stronger and better for players. And I knew that was absolutely true. And that's why you saw that first softball season for Athletes Unlimited started at the end of August. It was designed to start after the NPF championship. So
right.
I think for me, that feels good too. I have, collaboration is strength. And when you are at a point of weakness and a lack of strength, which is what women's professional sports in general, that's the space you're operating from. Very little leverage, very little strength. So when you have collaboration, that's when all boats are going to rise. And for some reason, that's difficult for some folks to see, but it feels really good to be on that side of it and to be holding your hands out to other people. And it I think they feel the same. I think when you see us playing, we play our whole lacrosse season at the home of USA Lacrosse, which is a beautiful facility with a beautiful building there in Sparks, Maryland. The whole venue is, pristine. We play, and when we look at volleyball, we're talking about collaborating with USA Volleyball, carries a lot of the games and historically has done that when it was possible. And then you mentioned it just a second ago. You look at basketball, and our games, all but 5 of them, were on League Pass, WNBA League Pass last year. And that also was a collaboration. I think that not only felt good to us and in particular to our players, but it also felt good to the WNBA. And I think I think we realize, I think most folks realize that you're only stronger if you'll just stand together.
Right, right. And you mentioned facilities, so that makes me think of, for softball, just being in Rosemont at what was the Chicago Bandits, field and stadium for a while. And I know right now, actually, Kansas City, in terms of soccer, professional soccer, women's soccer, is getting a lot of credit for, constructing a stadium for specifically pro soccer. But I think back to, the fact that this facility in Rosemont has existed, and it really was just for professional softball. So I feel like, that stadium's getting some credit as the first, but I kind of want to give that credit to softball because that did exist.
Yeah, Jenna, that is exactly. I've seen the same, and I'm a girl that grew up 50 miles from Kansas City, so I'm quite proud of them, and I'm proud of what they've developed there with soccer. But Rosemont and the mayor of Rosemont, Brad Stevens, was the first person to build a professional stadium just for a women's pro sports team. That was not a multi-purpose venue. I mean, it is used at times for other things, but it was built for the Chicago Bandits. So I think that too shouldn't go underplayed, and that is the support. Really, from the outset, my goal, when I could tell that John Patrikoff was talking about, it might be volleyball, it might be ice hockey, it might be this, and softball was in the conversation, my goal was to sell it, to make sure that he believed softball was the right thing. And Rosemont was so instrumental in making that a convincing pitch because of the venue and because of not only that, but you have the stadium that's 100% artificial, a stone's throw away. You have the dome with 2 full fields. That has been critical to us, and especially when we launched in COVID, to be able to have that dome where our players could be and train and be isolated and still, have some mentality that you need in when you're in the middle of a pandemic, but also just the support that Rosemont has given us from a staffing, helping us with ticketing, helping us just operate that at a very high level. So I think when you look at partners, and if you go back to the NPF and the Chicago Bandits, once Rosemont took over ownership of that, they are that group that holds their hands out and will be the first to say, how can we make this better? So it's been very cool to see this iteration of Rosemont and that stadium and their commitment to the sport.
Absolutely. Because for me, it's so fun to see every single essentially competition outside of the first ever AUX being at San Diego State. And then, of course, went on the road a little bit with the Little League partnership this year. But pretty much everything has been in Rosemont for softball, for Athletes Unlimited. And it's one thing, to be a part of a new venture like Athletes Unlimited. It's another thing to be the sport that launches it the way that softball did, to be the first of the first, And so I think that's, I don't know. I agree with you. And I wanted to give that credit to Rosemont because I do think it's been huge.
Thank you. Thank you. And that's a perfect observation.
And you've mentioned holding your hands out. And that's actually a theme I remember that we talked about last time. It's been a while. It's been a few years since we've had you on the show. But I remember that being a theme back then, just in that first season. And now here we are, several seasons ahead. And at the time, Athletes Unlimited was the only softball option for professional play here in the States. Now, when you have a WPF, for example, and they're focused on softball specifically, whereas Athletes Unlimited obviously is more horizontal across a few women's sports. Do you think there is an opportunity there the way there was with the WNBA partnership?
Yeah, I hope so. I think softball has been a sport, just having been in the space for a long time. I think it's been a sport that's very splintered. I think that you've had some people come into the sport in various roles that have been interested, basically in their own climb and their own position in it in terms of power. So unfortunately, softball has been that sport that's been, I think, divided a lot. I will tell you, I'm pulling for the WPF. I like that. I like the traditional model as well. And I think that Athletes Unlimited was always built as a complement and a platform that can live well and play well with others and really strengthen the space for women. So I hope that we see, I think we all do, you have a couple of volleyball leagues launching now. And, I think we hope that for women, it's an opportunity and it's a chance for them to be full-time professionals in something that I always say they were born to do, that they're excellent at. So I think when you look at the space of softball and in terms, I'm a softball fan at heart and first and foremost, but I hope that's the way that comes out. But I think at first, even within the WPF, they have to be rowing in the same direction. They have to have, for every single owner and every single player, what's first and foremost for them has to be the survival and the elevation of the league itself.
Yeah. Yep. And I thought it was nice, for example, when we talk about working even with, you mentioned like with lacrosse, the facility using the USA facility, seeing this summer, for example, some folks from both Athletes Unlimited and the WPF taking that time to go and compete with Team USA, for example, going to Dublin in that first round of the World Cup. It was nice that AUX and the AU Champ Series didn't conflict at all. So it's a great opportunity for it to be kind of this continuous, just playing for these athletes. But then also it was nice that the WPF was allowing some of those athletes to leave part-time during the season to come back. But I just liked seeing that collaboration, it felt like, between those two as well.
Yeah, I think you have to have consideration. You definitely have to, and I think that's all the way around. I think back to the early days of the NPF, as I was coming into being commissioner, one of the problems for the teams at that time was that USA Softball was taking them not just for competition, but taking them for, 4 or 5 weeks up to that. Oh, we're going to go and do a tour here and we're going to practice here and we're going to do this and that. And so teams that were spending money on those athletes to not only pay them a salary, but bring them in and take care of them, they were missing them for more than half the season. So I think you have to pay attention to those things altogether. I know we already, Chris Sebrin sends me the dates for USA Softball every time they, are determined. And it's something that we talk about and look at and try to make sure that we're making space. We're extremely proud of our players that are national team players and hopefully, again, Olympians. And we want to make sure that they're getting to do that as well. That's a unique and extreme honor. And I think we'd be very happy if there was a way that our players could be in Athletes Unlimited and also WPF.
Well, and there were so many Olympians across the board, to your point, who ended up competing in Tokyo, who have been a part of Athletes Unlimited. I do think that it was such a big part of the prep, especially like you said, COVID, there weren't a lot of opportunities. Kind of the only softball we got outside of the first little bit of the college season was AU in 2020. And so they did get to play and have that before the Olympics. And I think that seems like it was just a big part of not only preparing them from a softball standpoint, but the impression I got from chatting with all of them on here was just sort of like mental and emotional preparation, and almost like getting to have that sort of love for softball in the midst of something that was really hard.
Yes, I agree. And I think that just you mentioned the mental part of it. I think, when we talk about being, you know, isolated into a place where you don't get to go out to the public, I'll never forget Kat Osterman saying, I think she tweeted it out, but she said, Starbucks is literally 100 feet from our hotel. I can't imagine what those employees think when we continue to have coffee delivered. But they couldn't go out. They couldn't go in a restaurant or anything. So I think that for them to actually get to be isolated with their friends, that year our roster was 56. So to go somewhere and you got to be around 55 people. That's more than most people got to do during the isolation of the pandemic. So I do think that was and they always said, I think those players loved that season. And they always said, we know it'll never be quite the same again once the world opens back up. So.
Well, and that's true for Athletes Unlimited in general, where it's like each week you feel like you kind of fall in love with your team, it seems, and then that team might not ever exist ever again, right? Because that's just the nature of it. But it's still a great experience, it appears, at least from what they've told me.
Yeah, I think that is universal. It's across all of our sports. It's certainly a different dynamic, but it's why a lot of the players say they love it, and that there's this competition challenge of, hey, I have to figure out this new catcher, or middle infielders have to figure out, what it feels like and looks like to play out there in tandem with someone. But I think that also you just see this group. I always smile. I'm sitting usually in the truck watching the broadcast, and I smile when I see, somebody round first and go back to first. And you can see them having this casual, fun conversation with the first baseman, or they'll help each other up, or there'll be a hard slide in the second and they go check with the person. So, it's, I think after Rachel Garcia hit Sydney Romero for the second or third time, and one that really you could see hurt her, they were on the same team the next week. And so it is a very cool dynamic. But I think what the players will tell you in softball with the 60 player roster is that they're in there with 59 of their friends, and it's more of a 60 person team than it is a 15 person team as it pans out every week.
Right. And when you think about it in that way, how do you measure success for Athletes Unlimited? Obviously, there are the business type metrics that you're looking at in terms of numbers. Maybe there are even sport metrics, right? Like we want players to have longer careers, for example, than they used to have. But then there's also this sort of almost feel good piece that you're mentioning, this anecdotal thing where you're like, when you see them smiling, that's got to feel like at least some sort of success too. So when you think about it, how do you measure success for what you're doing?
I think that's the cool thing about Athletes Unlimited, that there are other things besides just the business metrics that are being measured and that really matter to us in terms of operating the leagues and things like that. But I think that I will tell you, I'm a huge advocate for the business working. I want women's sports to be a success. And I am a firm believer that they can be a business success, be something that is profitable and something that is viable, and that these women should be able to be at the same levels as their male counterparts as professional athletes. So I believe in all that. And I think we have to not take our foot off the gas when we look at attendance and we look at partnerships and when we look at media rights. Those things have to be present. You're not going to be profitable without them. Merch sales, all of those things. But I will tell you that I was standing off to the side of the after party on Sunday night, probably the proudest of the entire league, just looking out at the sea of 60. And there's a lot of staff and other people there, but watching people truly just have fun and knowing that there weren't a lot of axes to bury. There wasn't a lot of animosity throughout or anything. It was there was a quite a lot of just purity in looking out at people that like each other, respect each other, and were simply having fun together after 5 weeks of extremely intense competition.
Yeah, from the athlete perspective too, that just it has to feel really nice to see that from the people who are putting the product together really on the field. But then I think I also heard in a podcast interview you did a few months back that you were talking about how something that you think should happen for women's sports and is happening more and more is that it's in the kind of casual conversation that people are having about sports. The way that, people might casually talk about, oh, did you see the game on Tuesday? And maybe they're referring to an MLB game, but maybe they're not. What if they're referring to, a softball game? It doesn't just have to be the men's sports, and to have that at a casual level says something.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it has to come into mainstream, but something can't come into mainstream because we want it to, or because you and I are talking about it on a podcast. It has to become part of the casual conversation. So I remember I covered the Women's College World Series from the studio for 8 years. So I would go to Bristol through the primary tournament, and then when it got down to the best of three, the finals, I would go to Charlotte with ESPN Regional, where you was, and some other studios. So I remember being in Charlotte, and so the whole series had gone. We were down to the finals, and I was in a McAllister's Deli. It was kind of my pregame. I would always go over there and get a sandwich, and I had placed my order. I'm standing there ready for it, and the two guys who looked somewhat unlikely, I guess, to me, if I'm categorizing to be sports fans, but they're back there fixing stuff and getting my half and half tea and all that stuff, and they're talking about the Women's College World Series, and they know it, and I thought to myself, we've arrived. Somebody behind the counter at this restaurant is talking about it. But why did that happen? Because college softball became commonplace on television. You started to casually see it, and when you casually see it, it's easy for you to follow along. But when you have to, go over the river and through the woods and to get to a game and be able to and you can't watch it on your TV, and you have to get it through this device, and you have to subscribe here and put this in every time. It's frustrating. It's not easily accessible, and it's certainly not casual. So I think we have to continue to see that placement. I make a big deal out of the Sports Center top 10. One, there's a ton of reasons for it, but to relevant to what we're talking about right now, it becomes commonplace. When you see, Sports Center top 10 has its own life. And when you make that, you now are in the living rooms. And so I think that's always important to be in that lineup, and proud that we were there both with lacrosse this summer and softball.
See, and that's exactly what I mean too. And I'm asking, like, how do you measure success outside of just the standard business metrics? Because maybe it's not as cut and dry, right, as with specific numbers and things, but to see multiple times we've seen athletes make it to the top 10. And that's part of that conversation like you're talking about. So I just think it's interesting. We talk about defining success and redefining success when we're players or coaches, et cetera. But it's also interesting to think about it from, business first, as you mentioned, because you have to have that stability, but thinking about it from the perspective of growing the sport as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think, there's just so many things when going back to the Sports Center top 10 comparison, you can turn that on anytime, any random given night, and see 10 men make top plays. And for me, and part of that is just what we just talked about. The women's sports, they're happening. They're just not accessible. They're not easy to get to. And I've been in the studio when those guys are in the other green room or the other workspace pulling out the top 10 plays. And I know that they don't really have an agenda. They're just looking for amazing stuff. And fun stuff. So there should always be women in there, but until it's commonplace and readily available and easily accessible, it's difficult even for them.
Yep, that's very true. And I know last time we talked about too how the Olympics and having softball on that stage led to, more investment in college softball, for example, with the SEC, et cetera, facilities, all of those
Right.
things. And then we're looking at this sort of in the sense of progress. For professional softball, one of the elements of Athletes Unlimited that I think has been fantastic, and they constantly get shout outs actually, is the content team. And the
Mhm.
fact that social media is obviously now a part of the equation the way maybe it wasn't, right, at the very beginning of the MPF, for example. But it seems like that investment in that has also been really key because that's easy to access. To your point, that is casual. People being on social media and seeing different things being posted, in addition to being on like ESPN and CBS and things.
Yeah, I think from point one, I will give full credit to Jonathan Soros and John Patricof because I think from point one, they realized the power of that one to one, that what social media enables you to do. And I will tell you that, I think we have larger embodiment of content creators than you see some major MLS teams have, where people you're looking at somebody else that's really trying to reach at it and needs to reach on a social level. And so I think we have a lot of people committed to that. I think we have some really creative people that work hard at it, that make sure that they're up on the trends. Our players are wild over that, over the content that they get from that team. And also, I think that I'll say from a broadcast standpoint, we try to make sure that the things we shoot on media day and the air on television, that those are also accessible to the players. If they're mic'd up in a game, we make sure they get those clips. So I think across the board, we try to make sure our athletes are able to, if they're invested in trying to grow their brands, that they're able to do that. And I think from a commitment side, again, everything you have to be you have to dig in. You have to say, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. This is how much it's going to cost, and we're committed to staying the course because this is important to growing the brand. So when you see Jade Hewitt out there every single minute of a game, constantly grabbing pictures, you're going to get the documentation of the event and of the competition in the way that we do, which is extremely unique, I think.
It's very true, and it's very helpful because I'll even say some people who I've had on this show who have maybe been around the game for decades, if I'll go looking for a photo of them when they played, it's sometimes pretty hard, even for some of the biggest names in softball, to find it from back then, right? So the fact that we have that now and that Athletes Unlimited is really, I mean, just taking it to the next level, I think is just really important. And I think it's cool that the content includes information about how they are as people, because you talked about how they're all friends, like the athletes enjoy the relationships between each other. Well, fans enjoy getting to know the athletes at a different level as well, and they'll have funny clips with just like people's opinions on things or what their favorite songs are, the simplest things, but it's still engaging and it's more relatable as well.
It really is, and it's sticky. As soon as they start saying, that you have our person that controls a lot of our Twitter, Adeline's standing there. So first of all, she's standing there as they're walking in. So right away, I'm like, what's Adeline asking them today? So I want to know her question. And then as soon as you hear the question, hey, breakfast for dinner or dinner for breakfast, what's your preference? Now I want to hear what people are saying. I want to hear
Yeah.
the answers. So it's that kind of thing too, that it sticks to you and it's interesting enough to, to keep you engaged, which is, the goal all the way around. So it's been fun. And then I think when you get to something like Little League and you're doing some type of a special event, you're able to magnify that even more. You're able to see behind the scenes even more. You get to a retirement. You saw Abby Ramirez retired this year.
Yeah.
And, there was a 2-minute video on kind of stitched together of people talking about her, which was super nice and super deserved. So it enables you to do a lot of things. But Jenna, you mentioned a, key part right there in that, we've lost so much of our history because things weren't documented. People weren't, we weren't even being, there was no constant film or recording of it in that way. And then in a lot of instances, you didn't have pictures. I will tell you, I was dying. We had Danielle Laurie called, I think she was in venue for 5 days this year. But, there is an amazing NPF moment that Danielle Laurie was pitching. She hit Megan Wiggins for maybe a numerous time. And Megan Wiggins was going to the mound. She was on her way to the mound. And Lauren Lappin was catching. Lappin went out, took 3 steps, got Wiggins, and got her back in line to head to first. But I promise you, I would have made sure that made air when Wiggins was coming to bat and Danielle Laurie was on the call. But I've Googled it and searched for it, and it's just not readily available.
Right.
But it's a moment. It's a moment that would be super fun and super interesting, and might be gone forever.
Well, that's the thing too. Is I think some of you said it, our history. And sometimes we wonder now when maybe newer fans or kind of younger players are getting involved in the game, like, man, they don't really know the history. Like I remember, some people didn't know who Dot Richardson was when I was traveling for postseason, some current college softball players. And to me, that's like, how is that possible? Right. But, we didn't have all of that. So the part of me even wants to try to create some sort of, big reference guide or something for softball history, but that's a whole other conversation. But it's nice that we know we're not going to have that problem now, like from here on out, because we do have that information and that distribution.
But a lot of people now take that for granted. So we can say like our social media and our content team is super cool and super good, but there's a whole level of appreciation for that if you've lived through nothing and you realize that those moments like we're talking about. I used to stand and tell people, I would be at parks when Florida Atlantic's playing, and I'm like, do you know who that woman is? How can you not know who Joan Joyce is and that she's amazing? But to so many people, they had no idea. And if you asked them if she was a slingshot or a windmill, most people would have guessed windmill. Half of those people have never heard of slingshot. So I think that, there is a greater appreciation if you've lived through the history and you realize that all these moments that people love right now and are embracing and can't get enough of, those moments were still happening 20 years ago. We just are never going to see them unless you saw them in real life and you can remember them. Right.
And that's why sometimes too, there's a little bit of recency bias, right? If we're talking about like, oh, who's the GOAT, and a lot of people know who Lisa Fernandez is because she's part of the game still, obviously coaching and everything. But there's others that would be on the list too, that maybe not everybody knows. But they'll think about recent people because that's who they saw. But that just speaks to the importance of exposure once again.
That's exactly right. And complete names are lost. You could bring up names. You could take 5,000 college players right now and ask them who Kathy Aronson is. And, Kathy Aronson was a wow factor. She was unbelievable to see and to try and hit against. But so many people don't even know that, wouldn't be able to tell you she was a softball player.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And it makes me think of this kind of line that we walk in terms of, I think, especially in women's sports, where you want to keep pushing forward, but you want to have the gratitude for how far we've come as well. But you don't want to stop. You want to keep going forward. But sometimes those two things kind of wrestle with each other. So it's an interesting thing for us to manage.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think but I think there's so much loss. Like everybody automatically goes to pay. It's right in front of us, and that's what it's the forefront of the trudge for equality. But there's so many things that if you just peel back the layers that are tragic, and losing your history is one of those.
Right. Something that's interesting about Athletes Unlimited too now is that there is more and more history. Though, like as I think it's cool every time there's a champion, it's like, oh well, they're in the history books. They are being literally their name is being written in the book, as the champion. But the first season, everything was historic because everything was new. Now you have certain things that are historic within Athletes Unlimited, like Alyssa Denham being the first back-to-back medalist, for example. How does that sort of feel to be able to have that now where you're like, oh wow, we're actually building history now?
Again, I think that's another layer. I think it's really cool. I mean, Taylor Moreno in lacrosse, the first back-to-back champion. And then, as you mentioned, Alyssa Denham comes in and back-to-back medals. And when I heard that one, it was kind of, I was surprised by that one. I just wasn't thinking that deep. I would say a little over a year ago, brought on a sports information, sports media person. His name's Eric Rue. He kind of covers all of our sports like an SID would in college, but then he goes much deeper. He's created record books and all of that stuff that I think even some of our folks did not realize the importance of that history. And,
Yeah.
our social team and our broadcast team, immediately were elated that all of a sudden at their fingertips was, has this ever happened before? And so just and having been a former broadcaster, those are your moments. Like, is this the longest game, or is this the most? And when you start to now, like you said, and I think the point you're making is it really starts to matter when you hear a first ever, or this is the longest at bat ever, or these are the most home runs. She's going for Mia Davidson may have been hit by pitch more this year, but now that you're getting some history behind you, it starts to matter. And when those records are set or broken or tied or approached, you think about the people that went before. And I think our broadcasters have done a good job. Think of these people, look at Alyssa Denham. Think of that. Kat Osterman was our first ever champion. She did not repeat as a medalist. Not only did she not repeat as a champion, she didn't repeat as a medalist. So I think that, and then you know how great she is. So all you have to do is say one name that this is in, 4 seasons hasn't happened. But at any rate, I think that is something that, of course, as time goes on, those record-breaking moments even become more significant. But you have to have the history to be able to mark the moment.
Exactly. And the fact that is the first time that's happened, for example, it just also speaks to the level and the world class, elite players and athletes that are a part of Athletes Unlimited too, which it's hard. It's hard to do it, to medal, and it's hard to repeat, obviously. So I think that really speaks to that.
And I think also what gets lost on people sometimes is that the density of the talent pool. So there's 60 players there. And, when you go around, if you had a 20-team league and at this level, and if you had a 20-team league, you're going to have a drop off there. So when you're going through a lineup, there are breaks you get, whether it's because you own a particular hitter that's still good, but you just have her number, or you just start to face some people that maybe aren't as good. And so you get that drop off. But in a 60-player roster, that's very difficult, especially for those folks that are in those lineups. You have 4 teams of that densely populated talent pool. I think sometimes that also gets lost. I remember being at a USA tryout, and they said, you're going to throw 3 innings. Okay. I wanted no one to get on base because I didn't want to face anyone twice. I knew if I could go 3 out, 3 up, 3 down 3 times, I just faced everybody once. I knew how good those hitters were to be able to come around twice. And that was going to, so you look at this and you think about it, and to be able to accomplish what they're accomplishing and being champions. And I know we talk about pitchers at the top all the time, but to be able to face that densely populated talent level in the hitters time after time and succeed is an amazing accomplishment.
It is. I think something for college athletes to pay attention to, college pitchers too, because, we see everything's by committee now, as it should be. Hitting is so fantastic. But just to see how the pros rise to that challenge, because it is tough, especially in conference and things when people know you, especially as you become an upperclassman. And those are the types of challenges that if you go to the pro level, you're going to play against a lot of the same people, right? So it is interesting.
Yeah. There's always that next level. There's always something to think through. I think that definitely we did see staff management start to come in a lot better this year, maybe better than we've ever seen it in terms of you saw pitchers come out before there was a fire. It wasn't always I have to get in this position of desperation before I'm coming out. Sometimes they were just like, hey, here's where we are in the lineup. I need to get out of here. She needs to come in. And so I thought that just in terms of staff management, you saw it a lot better this year.
There's so many things you can learn about being a better coach. I think of, for example, Morgan Zirkle, who is, now the head coach at her alma mater, but she's still playing as well. And she's got some people on staff and Athletes Unlimited too. And they get to have both of those hats on at like different times, thinking through being what you're going to do as a player, but also the strategy and how to manage a game as a coach, quote unquote. And so I think that's interesting too, for other people to think about for their careers beyond just playing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, one of the things that people hesitated at when we first started to build, what is, okay, we're going to launch softball. What does softball look like? And the comment of, what about just having no coaches? And then once that decision, that was kind of a moment of gasping in itself. And then when you started to relay that, I was on, every player pitch call and there's no coaches. And, a lot of people you always got a reaction and often you've got a question or comment on that. But then I think that too, I'm super proud of our players because they are able to manage that and do so well at it. And I think there are times when I think to myself, I think I'll give you two instances. The squeeze play, the Sierra Romero, Vic Hayward scores, Sierra puts the bunt down. That called squeeze play. They went to it, they had a moment, they thought of it, they executed it, and it was tremendous. So if we were just talking about a normal college game, we'd talk about guts and we'd talk about savvy and we'd talk about, all those things that it takes to execute that play. And then I think the other moment for me, if you want to go to a totally different thing, is Abby Ramirez. So Abby Ramirez is going to retire. Danielle Gibson is the captain. And with 2 outs in that game, Gibson calls timeout. For whatever reason, we were tight on her, and I saw her start to do this. And I was like, I was confused at the moment because it was the final game. And I thought, is she doing this for Odyssey, who's on the other team? And it was the moment where she let Abby walk off and have the moment in Rosemont. And I think to myself, and I said it afterwards, I have seen Hall of Fame coaches lose that moment, not do that pomp and circumstance, not give somebody that tip of the hat and that monumental moment. But yet Danielle Gibson did it as a captain and a player. She was in the game. Think of all that. So I think that those are things that to me are big and that prove, day in and day out. How many times did we see Odyssey take herself out and put Sandercock in, or, whatever it was, and see the big picture that it's important to win and see and have confidence in someone else. And so, at the end of the day, that those are always questioned, like, oh, should she have gotten the points, from the outs? But she could have also gotten the points from the outs. She could have given up earned runs and gone backwards. She could have lost the game. She had the state of mind to say, this is the best thing for our team. So I'm always really proud of those moments too, where we see those captains take charge, make incredible decisions, and the right decisions most of the time.
The retirement moments have been some of my favorites because the caliber of player, but also people that we've seen have those moments in Athletes Unlimited, like a Kat Osterman. You mentioned Abby Ramirez, Amanda Chittister at one point. Courtney Gano didn't get to have that moment at the end just with AUX because of the weather and things, but she said she still felt, she came on the show and I got to talk to her about it. She still felt so at peace with how supportive everybody was around her and just the love that she felt. And she was like, I'm so glad that I came back for AUX and had that as my final moment. So that's got to feel good too, that these athletes want that big moment, culmination of most of them a lifelong career in a sport, and they decide to have that moment in AU.
I know. And how many people, when Kat did it, I was like, who wouldn't want to retire at Athletes Unlimited? You know, it's it is just incredible. And you know, our content team made a video for Gano. We even did it at the award ceremony, which I don't think was live, but I think, you know, it is this, I guess, again, it is marking a moment in time for someone. And I think the videos and the just to be able to say, you know, Abby is a hometown girl. She played high school ball at that stadium. And so to be able to walk off there in the way that she did, there can't be any better feeling to top your career. So I think those are special. And I think anytime that you're able to acknowledge someone and be a part of an appreciation of what someone has done for anything, I think it feels good. I think it feels good if you're clapping in the stands. I can tell you, you know, it feels good if you're sitting in the truck, and it has to feel good to those people that are on the field.
And those are the big things that, like you said, you know, of course, we want women's sports to succeed from a business standpoint. Absolutely. But those are kind of those, I don't know, warm, fuzzy feelings that tap into the why for all of us, I think, are things and moments like that. And I think it's really special. And it's nice that, it's so accessible to see those moments in AU.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree.
Well, I could keep on all day long. I've really appreciated the time.
How could I?
Yeah, I think it'd be easy for us to, right? Which is kind of the point. But I've really appreciated the time that you've given me today, but also wanted to wrap up with a game that I play with everyone who comes on. I do think we played this last time. It's evolved a little bit, but it's called Safe or Out.
Okay.
And I'll bring up a topic. If you like it or you agree with it, you call it safe. If you don't, then you'll call it out.
Okay. I'm gonna stick with you here. I don't know if we played this before.
I think we did, but I'm gonna mix up the questions. Not the same as last time. So, so the first one is the conference realignments in college. Safe or out?
Out.
Yeah. It's been interesting to witness.
I think what makes it out for me most of all is just I believe in community, and I believe in natural rivalries, and I think that all of the things that some people love and live for have just been blown to smithereens for just some like ridiculous chase for money. Is there not enough money in college sports? Is our coaches not making enough? And, you know, so I think that's what you continue to hear. Well, this conference offered him this much and this conference offered him this much. Is that really the bottom line? Is that better than what we were creating over here with a natural rivalry or, you know, whatever it might be, of the just pure love of the sport and the competitions?
Yeah. I think I read somewhere recently that, like, the word amateur, for example, which is what, you know, collegiate athletes were considered for a very long time, comes from, I think, the root of the word amer means, or amor means love, right? And it's the idea is for love of the game. And now it seems like that's kind of shifting to where these collegiate athletes are actually more like pros. And that's just different. Fans, I think, look at college and pro differently as well. So I'm curious to see how that shakes out.
I think it's also very hard on the lesser sports and the lesser programs, the ones that aren't able to take charters and the ones that aren't able to have just training tables and everything. When now it's going to take you and jet lag and just travel in general. Travel's not easy, period. And it takes its toll on you. So now you're expected to still pass that chemistry test on Thursday when you just got back Tuesday night late and, you had delays. And, we all know every school in the country, every sport in every school that's in these conferences that are now have to fly across the country are not going to be on charters.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be difficult and it kind of defeats the purpose. So for me, I'm not afraid to say it. The NCAA is like the parent that wants to be the friend. They don't want to make the hard decisions and ground the child. They just want to, sit around and drink beer together and, cuss every now and then and be a buddy. And so, I just think that that's what happened. Somebody's asleep at the wheel. It was the governing association. And so it's all bets are off and it's just going crazy chasing money.
So with that being said, NIL, safe or out?
This might need a captain's challenge. I think there's a safe component to it, but I think without any regulation to it, with that just being a free for all, I think there are going to be so many problems. I think if you brought something like that in, it had to have a whole level of management and governance. And I don't think that's what's happened at all. I think it's just the insertion of money. And I think that money is corrupt in many cases. So.
Yeah. How do you think, or do you think that NIL affects pro sports, women, I guess, in this case?
I think that it takes the problem with women pro sports is that historically there's been no corporate investment in it. And that's what leads to the salaries that you see male athletes make. It's that corporate partnership leads to media and media rights.
Yep.
And that's where the money comes in. And so predominantly. And so with the lack of those two pieces, that's why there isn't money in women's pro sports. So if you now are going to start engaging with just one-off stars, you still could say if the money is finite, which it typically is, budgeted, it went there. It went to that one Caitlin Clark over there because she's a star. And right now she's having a moment. Who I love, by the way, Caitlin Clark. So I'm using her as an example. But what it could possibly do is show you what a Caitlin Clark can do. And when she doesn't have that college platform, if you're the NIL, if you're the person paying her for her name, image, and likeness, you need her to have a platform now. Right. If she was really valuable over here with that platform, you need this new platform to be strong. And maybe you would invest in that. But I'm in that scenario. I'm banking on people having vision, and I don't know if that's always the case.
Yeah. Yes, I've always thought that was interesting, specifically with women's sports. So I was interested to hear your take. All right. Well, the last one is, and this one, I guess I lied. I did ask you this one last time, but I want to see if your thoughts are the same. Bat flips, safe or out?
Safe.
That's what you said last time.
All day, every day. I love a bat flip. I need it.
Consistency. I like it. I think you mentioned last time that, you were hoping to get a game with Sam Chow and be able to cover her. And I think you eventually did, in terms of broadcasting. So, you're consistent. I like it.
Yeah, I'm right there. I need a good bat flipper.
It's entertaining, that's for sure.
Yes. Yes. I actually, we did an innovation summit last week, Thursday
Mhm.
and Friday. It's a really cool event that we did in our finals week with a lot of partners. It was really heavy in terms of talent, just people participating with us. But Sarah Spain was there, and I was moderating with Sarah Spain. And Savannah Collins, who's our reporter, had said, I go, hey, if you were going to ask Sarah one question, what is it? And Savannah goes, ask her if villains are important to women's pro sports. And so I
Mm.
did. And I knew her answer before I asked it, but she's like, absolutely. Yes. That is fun. And my sort of qualifier is, I know Angel Reese's name because of this,
Right,
you
right.
just like that moment. And, so anyway, it is something that I think is fun. I think sometimes that's a big turnoff for people. They're super worried that, whatever, it's not, we're not going to fit the mold of where they want women and girls to be. But, it's sports and it's fun and it's competition. And so I think a little of the swagger and that if it's cockiness, whatever it is, I think it's part of the fun.
Well, to your point, that's part of the casual conversation. Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark were part of the casual conversation in sports. And that's the casual conversation that you hear about men's sports. So, I mean, I think it's a disservice to only talk about, rainbows and butterflies for women's sports because that's not realistic. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I liked both the reactions. I didn't mind Angel doing it in the first place. And you know what? Caitlin Clark's comment was, hey, it's part of it.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Well, thank you again, Cheri. Love the shirt, by the way, for everyone that can
All right.
see
Thank
the
you.
AU.
It's one of my favorite ones.
It's a good one.
Thanks
I
a
like
lot.
it. It's great to have Cheri back on the show to catch up. And kind of like Athletes Unlimited, I feel like this show, it also launched in 2020. And we're getting to a point where we actually have history with our guests. And it's been fun to just kind of grow alongside of it in that way. So with that, let's transition to the foul tip of the week. This week's foul tip is about taking the phone call. Cheri literally took the phone call when AU reached out to her initially when she was still the NPF commissioner. Fast forward to now, and she's an executive for AU elevating softball and multiple other women's sports. I just think that the metaphor here is important because you never know what could happen. So take the call, explore the option, evaluate the opportunity, at least learn about it. Because I think regret comes from never taking the call at all. If you take the call and it's not for you, you're in the same position you were in before with maybe even a little bit more knowledge. But I do want to caveat this by clarifying too. I'm not saying to take every phone call, quote unquote, that comes up in your life. Because in today's world, we overextend ourselves all the time. We can actually be guilty of taking too many phone calls and just getting overwhelmed. And I do think there's power in saying no. But I'm also a believer in listening to your gut. So I'm talking about those opportunities or those phone calls that you have a feeling about, or that maybe they make you wonder, they've piqued your interest for some reason, even if you can't explain it, because it might be worth it to take those phone calls. Maybe you want to play in college in a school that you hadn't considered as interested in you, or maybe you're not looking for a job, but you learn about a role that sounds really interesting to you. If there's a chance that they could invest in you, maybe you can invest a little time into them, because you'd want to learn more about it before saying yes. So learn about it before saying no too, because you never know. How many times do we hear stories about people who had an unexpected opportunity that came up, whether it was professional, personal, whatever, and they're so grateful now because even though they didn't picture it that way back then, now they wouldn't have wanted it to happen any other way. But they had to take that phone call first to find that out. So that's it. Take the phone call. That's a foul tip of the week. You've been listening to Bleav in Softball, part of Bleav Network and presented by BetOnline. The show is available anywhere you get your podcasts, wherever you listen, including Bleav.com and YouTube too. Subscribe to the show, rate the show, and if you liked it, write a review for it. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Again, that's BLEAV at Bleav in Softball. And you can reach out to me personally on Twitter at Jenna Becerra01 and Instagram at Jenna Becerra as well. Thank you for tuning in, and catch you soon.